In 1944, victory depended on one question no army had ever answered. How do you invade a continent without a port? The beaches of Normandy were unprotected only by geography. Every harbour in France had been fortified, mined, or destroyed. To the Germans, the problem was insoluble. Without a port, the Allies could never land the hundreds of thousands of tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies needed to cross Europe. But in secret workshops across Britain, engineers were designing the impossible, a harbour that could float, flex with the tide, and assemble itself in open water. They called it Mulberry, and it would become the greatest engineering gamble of the Second World War. It began with a single line from Winston Churchill, dated May 1942. Piers for use on beaches. They must float up and down with the tide. Churchill, a former First Lord of the Admiralty, understood logistics as strategy. If the Royal Navy couldn't capture a port, it would build one. The Admiralty was skeptical. Generals dismissed it as fantasy, but Churchill overruled them all. Under the Ministry of Supply, two British engineers, Hugh Iris Hughes and Alan Beckett, were given a secret directive: design and test a floating harbour capable of landing an army. By 1943, they had prototypes, breakwaters made from concrete phoenix caissons, floating whale roadways, and spud pierheads mounted on adjustable steel legs. The project was codenamed Operation Mulberry. Britain became a single, vast shipyard. Over 40,000 men and women worked in secret across 300 sites. In Scottish locks, English estuaries, and Welsh shipyards, they poured 600,000 tons of reinforced concrete into moulds. Each phoenix caisson was 60 meters long, 17 wide, and 18 deep, weighing over 6,000 tons. When complete, they could be flooded and sunk to form artificial breakwaters. Steel factories in Middlesbrough and Darlington produced the floating roadways, whales, each section 80 feet long, joined with massive ball-jointed hinges to flex with the sea. Everything had to fit together like a Meccano set, yet survive the English Channel. To keep the secret, workers were told they were building dock sections for a new base. Few guessed they were constructing the infrastructure of invasion. The prototypes were tested along England's south coast. At Selsey Bill and Garliston, naval officers simulated tides, storms, and beach gradients. Failures were frequent. Concrete split, roadways twisted, entire pierheads capsized. But the engineers adapted. Alan Beckett's final pierhead design, supported by 4 self-adjusting steel legs, could rise and fall 6 meters with the tide. By early 1944, 2 complete systems were ready. Mulberry A for the Americans at Omaha Beach, Mulberry B for the British at Arromanches. Together, they would be towed across the channel by more than 150 tugboats, a convoy of concrete, steel, and audacity. June 6, 1944, D-Day. While the first waves stormed the beaches, the Mulberry fleet assembled off England's coast. 2 days later, the first Phoenix units were towed across the channel at 4 knots. Each was positioned and sunk in place using precise tidal calculations. Behind them followed the Whales, 10 miles of floating roadways connecting ships to shore. Within 6 days, the first vehicles were rolling from Liberty ships onto Normandy soil, a man-made port rising from the surf. At Arromanches, engineers worked round the clock under shell fire to anchor spuds and whales, while cranes unloaded ammunition and fuel. The Germans watched from the cliffs in disbelief. The invasion they had predicted would collapse was feeding itself from the sea. Then, disaster. On June 19, 1944, a violent channel storm struck without warning, the worst in 40 years. For 3 days, 50 miles an hour, winds tore through the Normandy beaches. Mulberry A, the American harbour at Omaha, was obliterated. Caissons broke free, roadways shattered, and pierheads vanished beneath the waves. At Arromanches, British engineers fought to save Mulberry B lines snapped, moorings failed, but the harbour held. When the storm cleared, The British installation was battered, yet functional. Mulberry A was gone, but B became the sole lifeline of the Allied armies in France. Through it, more than 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies would pass before war's end. What began as one man's memo became a machine larger than any tank or aircraft. The Mulberries were more than ports. They were systems. They embodied a philosophy. That industry, not brilliance alone, wins wars. While German engineers perfected design, the Allies perfected delivery. They built not for elegance, but for endurance. Victory in Normandy was not forged in battlefields. It was poured in concrete, riveted in steel, and towed across the sea. In that equation lay the real power of modern war, not the weapon itself, but the supply chain behind it. Most of the men and women who built the Mulberries never saw them in action. They were shipwrights, carpenters, and steelworkers, ordinary civilians drafted into extraordinary engineering. Their names rarely appeared in dispatches, but their work outlasted the war itself. Every modern amphibious landing, from Incheon to the Falklands, traces its lineage back to the beaches of Arromanches. Today, the shattered remnants of Mulberry B still rest off the Normandy coast, barnacled, broken, yet unbowed. They have survived storms, tides, and time itself, a monument to the quiet power of engineering. When visitors walk the beach at Arromanches, they stand where history's greatest equation was solved: logistics equals victory. Hugh Hughes returned to civilian architecture. Alan Beckett received little recognition until long after his death. Neither man sought fame, but both changed the shape of war. Churchill later wrote, "The Mulberries were a colossal engineering feat. Without them, victory in Europe would have been delayed indefinitely." The Mulberry harbours marked the dawn of the age of war machines, when wars became contests of industry, not courage alone. Steel replaced stone, welders replaced warriors, and engineers became the quiet architects of freedom. In the end, victory did not belong to those who fought hardest, but to those who built smartest. As Churchill's memo predicted, the piers that floated with the tide carried not just cargo, but the weight of history itself.